we have a very interesting topic today. We're going to talk about Jürgen Habermas. And Habermas always had this interesting status in this course. Right? There were reasons to mention Habermas, but it's not like his tenure was secure. But as the years progress, as the years go by, I feel that the importance of Habermas to my thinking is increasing. Anyway, okay, I have to try to not waste time as much as possible, because we have a lot of ground to cover and we're starting 10 minutes later than we should. So, immediately. So the reading was fairly technical and fairly complicated, but that's okay. The reading does not actually come out and in a straightforward fashion say what I think is most important about Habermas. Not exactly sure why. Maybe because the reading is advanced and kind of presupposes that you know these things. But in general, Habermas' significance in the 20th and 21st century actually lies, I think, as far as I can understand, in a certain debate which did not actually take place as it should have, but like an indirect debate between several people. So on the one hand, we have the student of Martin Heidegger, whose name was Hans-Georg Gadamer. So let me just write Gadamer. So we have Gadamer on the one hand, and Gadamer is this conservative philosopher of interpretation. I mean, his most important idea, which he mostly takes from Heidegger, is the rehabilitation of prejudice. Rehabilitation of prejudice. So historical, Gadamer, on the one hand. So between, in the middle we have Habermas, and I'm going to talk about Habermas today. And on the other hand, we have Derrida, Jacques Derrida. And maybe, if you want to be careless, we can, with a question mark between Habermas and Derrida, write Foucault with a question mark. As I was planning this while I was on the way here, I was thinking that Fukuyama should be on the board somewhere as well. I'm not sure where to draw Fukuyama. So somewhere off on the side. But he's not part of the debate. I mean, as far as these guys are concerned, Fukuyama is a schoolboy, okay? He's not really allowed at the adult table. So he's sitting there at the kids' table. But somewhere over there, there's Fukuyama, again, with a question mark. And I'm going to try to place him somewhere. So, what is this? What are we talking about? So Gadamer is the Hermeneutics of Trust, if you want. The hermeneutics, as you know, as you actually don't know, is the philosophical discipline which deals with questions of understanding. So this is hermeneutics of trust. So the idea is that rehabilitation of prejudice. This will take a very long time to explain, but it's like this old Hegelian notion that human beings are products of history, and we cannot understand this process of history which we are a product of. So we just have to have faith in it. So maybe even let me write the word faith on the board. Faith, but always with a question mark. Because, I mean, all this is post-religious. So Gadamer is not a religious philosopher anymore. Hegel was, though. So on the other hand, so this would be hermeneutics of trust. If you don't understand what hermeneutics, don't worry too much. Okay. On the other hand, you have Derrida, and Derrida, in my mind, has emerged as the most radical philosopher in all of Western tradition. I'm not sure if this is true. I mean, Derrida himself would probably have been pleased because this is what I think he was trying to do. I'm not sure if this is entirely deserved, but at this point, the most radical philosopher that I can think of is Derrida on this side. And this would be the Hermeneutics of Suspicion. The Hermeneutics of Suspicion. So, this idea, Gadamer's idea, I think, or I hope, is fairly clear in the sense that, again, this Hegelian notion that we're products of history, we cannot understand history, so we just have to have faith. Like when you wake up in the morning, you cannot know whether the society in which you're living is rational or not, but you just have to have faith in history and trust other people and everybody else. I mean, so, you know, like if you ask this question, can I really know that you understand me? Not sure, you know, and how would I check that? Because, you know, I could ask you to produce some words, but how do I know that I understand those words in the correct fashion? So at the end of the day, I just have trust. I have faith. It's hermeneutics of trust. Derrida is kind of the other way around. So if I mean, both Gadamer and Derrida are to some extent coming from Heideggerian tradition because they're both heirs to Heidegger in an important respect. And in some important respect, actually, Derrida is just a flip side of Gadamer. And it's just two ways of looking at the same picture. It's like a Gestalt switch. You take the same story, and precisely because you gotta have faith for Gadamer, and this is irrational and non-justifiable, Derrida becomes this extreme skeptic and goes over to the side of hermeneutics of suspicion. Again, hermeneutics of suspicion is the notion that, well, I guess two things. One is that everything that we see in society is a product of power. So on the one hand, what I am doing here has nothing to do with science or truth or logic or whatever. I am simply here exercising power over you. So this is some kind of weird sadistic fantasy in which I simply like sort of experiencing this power relationship that we have. I talk, you listen. I can start the class whenever I want. I can finish the class whenever I want. So this is just pure exercise of power. And everything I say has no relation to truth whatsoever, or no necessary relation to truth. This is just me producing certain self-serving discourse. Except that, of course, I am not necessarily myself. I'm not sure. Should I have Derrida? Should I have Descartes on the board? Maybe. I am not necessarily myself. Maybe it's not me exercising power over you. But if you want my modules, my genes and memes exercising power over you, or actually, my genes and memes exercising power over your genes and memes. Okay, this was not a good idea. Yeah, embarrassing. So, what was it in Foucault? Micro penalties for indecency and lack of something. I don't know. Lack of decency, I suppose. Whatever. Go back here. So yeah, so on the one hand, power, but on the other hand, actually, it's an anonymous kind of power, in the sense that I do not speak language. Language speaks through me, and I actually don't know the meaning of the word meanings of the words that I am saying. If we had more time, I could try to tie this back to the topics we covered when we talked about Darwin and cultural evolution. Again, if you take this picture very seriously, something like this idea in Derrida emerges, that in the end, at the end of the day, you and me, we don't exist. We are just mindless nodes in the face of this exercise of blind structural autonomous power. And again, the things that I'm saying, these would be epiphenomena, so artifacts, unconscious byproducts, but let me use the word epiphenomena. Epiphenomena of genes and memes that populate my head, if you want. But it's actually not me speaking. It's not that I don't know what I'm saying. I'm not even speaking in an important sense. So language speaks through me. This is Derrida, an extreme skepticism, and sort of Habermas. Well, I'm not sure. Should we even actually talk about Gadamer in this class? I don't know. I'm not sure. Let me maybe possibly break it. This whole side. This is important for me maybe. Especially in my Hegelian modes, but I'm not sure if it's actually meaningful to talk about Gadamer today in our class. Anyway, so what I'm saying is that this is the challenge. This is the challenge of modernity. This is the challenge of post-structuralism and postmodernism. This is the challenge of people such as Foucault and Derrida. This idea that sort of by the end of our course, by the end of the 20th century, at the beginning of the 21st century, we are living in this mode of radical suspicion, and it's not clear if anything like democracy can ever actually exist. I mean, a different way to rephrase what Derrida is saying. Maybe I should have started with it, but let me try as fast as I can. Again, Derrida emphasizes that our life is filled with storytelling. Everything is a story, okay? And in some sense, Derrida is coming. This angle in Derrida appears from the practice of actually anthropology. Scientific anthropology in France in the middle of the 20th century. So this idea that you go You go to some remote tribe and you observe their behavior and you try to document their practices. So you say, look, so there's a bunch of people, they get together and they do this rain dance. And there are certain rules and structures according to which they perform this rain dance. But you know, as a researcher, that the rain dance isn't actually about bringing rain. Or at least as a researcher, you bracket this out. You just try to look at the practice in its own, not in its own terms, but just to look at the structural rules which are guiding the practice. So, and when you do this, well, again, there's a skeptical presupposition that you don't actually believe that the rain dances will bring about the rain, or some kind of religious ritual that is supposed to confer political authority on the chief. You don't believe that actually gods or ancestors are actually conferring power on the chief. No, you see this as a certain pretense, as a certain game, as a certain story that people tell one another. So basically, at the end of the day, there is no truth. There is only persuasion. And this sort of comes out of this anthropological way of looking at tribes. When Western anthropologists go to Africa or South America and look at the way tribes work. But this can be applied, and this was applied, to our contemporary situation. And Foucault actually talks about this. There are rules which regulate who is authorized to speak seriously, which questions are considered serious, and what is considered a serious answer. So I, in this room, am asking certain questions. Depends on which questions are those, right? So, like, I don't know, the causes of the crisis of 2008. That's supposed to be a serious question. I'm a professor at the university. I'm supposed to be authorized to speak in that fashion. And I can put forward certain arguments. I can refer to certain books. So I can try to explain the crisis of 2008 from the standpoint of, I don't know, Milton Friedman or Friedrich Hayek or maybe Karl Marx, and all of this is serious. But if I try to explain that through Harry Potter or Plotinus or Ptolemy's Almagest, you would not be impressed. So there are certain rules of discourse, and in some sense the question is why? Why? And I mean, can you give an ultimate justification for why certain references are fine and other references are not fine? And people like Foucault and Derrida would emphasize that most people, in fact, forget about lay people, most scientists will not be able to justify what is the difference between appealing to this authority or to that authority. For example, again, some people, students of international relations come to me and ask, what's the right interpretation of Nietzsche? And I give them a book by Cambridge University Press. Why do I trust Cambridge University Press and not some kind of, publishing house somewhere in Africa or in Moscow? Why? Why? And in some sense, people like Foucault and Derrida would emphasize that I am not in a position to answer this question. Yes, there's a certain structure of power, certain structure of persuasion, like Cambridge University Press is more prestigious, has more money, is associated with the degree of University of London, which has more clout, but at the end of the day, can I actually explain, do I know the reasons for why that's so? For why, basically, the account that Cambridge University Press is giving is somehow more solid than other accounts. And the same reasoning can be applied to anything, to questions of neurosurgery or vaccination or questions of Higgs boson. I mean, you can, and anthropologists actually did this. You go to a scientific lab and you look at the discovery of the Higgs boson as if this was a rain dance. Say, look, there's a bunch of people, they look at some instruments, they do some measurements, they talk to colleagues, but, is there actually such a thing as a Higgs boson, or is this just a social procedure? And doesn't the networks of friendship, collegiality, power, and authority networks within the system of science, isn't this as important as the readouts they get on the charts? Isn't it that some people, some laboratories, whatever they publish is automatically authoritative? And other people can have the best research, the best p-values, whatever, but nobody listens to them. Don't these things play a role? And I mean, in short, the answer is yes, at least to some extent. But the trouble is that if we go with Derrida all the way, we get into this very uncomfortable situation where it's absolutely unclear what is the difference between truth and persuasion. In fact, again, this is why it's called hermeneutics of suspicion. You suspect that behind every truth claim there's only persuasion, and that there is ultimately no truth whatsoever. And either this would be a product of power, or maybe even worse, product of anonymous power exercised by systems. This is the challenge. And I think this challenge has to be taken very seriously. In fact, everything in the history of Western philosophy points in this direction. Everything. Starting with the ancients, but especially people like René Descartes or David Hume or Immanuel Kant or even more so Friedrich Nietzsche. This is the direction in which we're going. And the short version, like the short summary of this debate is that this side wins by default, because nobody has been able to produce any serious knockdown arguments against these positions. This is a very uncomfortable position. This is a position that is customary to hate on, but strictly speaking, no solid argument against it has been proposed. And I'm going to talk today about Habermas, who proposes certain line of defense. But we have to keep in mind, so basically, for the purposes of this course, Habermas is anti-Derrida. But he's not going to give us an apodictic knockdown argument against Derrida. What he's going to do is he's going to propose a certain line of defense, if you want, which has to be taken with a grain of salt. It's a risky line of defense, but I think what he has to say is very interesting, and I plan to concentrate most of our class. And this is to some extent a digression on the one hand. On the other hand, I think without this context, it's just not clear. You read Boucher, I think it's a fabulous text, also fairly short, but without this introduction, it's not clear why are we talking about all this all over again. So a couple other things to mention with respect to Derrida, although I should get to Habermas as fast as possible. Although maybe next year we should have a whole class on Derrida. It's interesting question. Maybe we should, because there's a lot to talk about there. So I want to talk about. Let me at least mention Protagoras, Thrasymachus, and most important. Let me talk about vaccines. You see, the standard version is that when people look at somebody like Derrida, especially this notion that there is no truth, there's only persuasion, people get very upset, really emotional, really upset, and they say, "What do you mean everything is a story? How about Ebola epidemic? How about vaccination? Or the outbreak of measles? How about global warming? Is that just a story? How about exploitation of third world countries? Or how about pollution by bits of microplastic? How about all those things? Is this also just a story?" And Derrida has a characteristic response to this. So you tell it to him, and he says, "Oh, I see. All done?" This is Derrida's characteristic response to this. So like a rhetorical response. What is Derrida saying? What does he mean by clapping hands and saying "all done" with this very characteristically smug expression on his face? He said, "Look, what you are doing, saying, oh, but what about global warming, or what about terrorism, Ebola, etc., isn't this an attempt to justify your story by simply giving a different story?" Yeah. So your story about, let's say, faith and science is supposed to be justified by a story about global warming. But how is that story justified? Basically, Derrida draws our attention, and this I think, again, and my relationship with Derrida is complicated, and if nothing else, Derrida is a very intelligent philosopher, and everything he says has to be taken, I think, with utmost seriousness and utmost gravity. And what he's saying here, when he draws our attention to the fact that we justify stories by other stories, I think this has to be taken seriously and at face value. And again, I think that we have to grapple with the fact that there is no good answer to what Derrida is saying. There is no good counter-argument. That in his own terms, again, Derrida wins. The skeptical side wins by default because nobody is able to produce a better answer. Because yes, what can you do? You can hate on Derrida as much as you want. You can come to boiling point of anger. But the only thing you can do is give more stories. Stories. You say, but please come and look at my laboratory equipment. But that's a story. Because again, raw data. Students last year pointed this out. Raw data. But you see, data doesn't interpret itself. If you show me something in the microscope, or if you show me some readout on the monitor, you have to interpret that. You have to explain why exactly these results mean what you think they mean. So again, raw data does not exist. Even to read a measurement on a thermometer, that's an interpretive task. So outside of stories, outside of interpretation, nothing makes any sense by itself. So the only way you can justify stories is by more stories, and this is just circular. This is the sexist empiricist problem of criterion, which last year I said is a reciprocal mode in sexist. Maybe it is. I don't know. Maybe we should double check this. But it sounds vaguely plausible. Okay, so let me talk about Protagoras and Thrasymachus and segue into Habermas. So again, I think that Derrida's position has to be taken very seriously. And I think that to some extent, to do philosophy is to, one way or another, grapple with this problem. You have to look this in the eye, see this very seriously. And in order to be a philosopher, at some point in your life, you need to experience a feeling of complete vertigo, complete loss of ground beneath your feet. Because this picture on the board, if you properly understand it, should make you extremely uncomfortable. And if you're not, either you've thought about this before, and gotten used to it, or you don't understand what's on the board. But this should make you extremely uncomfortable. Because again, to the extent that you understand what's on the board, there's like no reason to prefer whatsoever. Like you wake up in the morning and you should be like in this horrible state of complete groundlessness. You have no idea what to do, and you walk across the floor, and there's no reason to believe that the floor will continue to support you from one moment to the next. Okay, enough of that. So let me start trying to move forward from this, because this is nice, and I think that in principle, it's possible to just stop here and say this is full stop. This is where philosophy comes down to, and Derrida is not new in discovering this. This is an old and venerable tradition. This is called noble silence. This is Buddha. This is what the Buddha would say about this. Yes, what Derrida says is right, and that's why we should simply maintain noble silence and achieve nirvana. Say a little bit like Sextus Empiricus. And this will be full stop. So reason destroys itself, end of story. We don't move forward from this. But again, to the extent that we are in this room and that we do not engage in noble silence, we can ask this question: is there a possibility to move forward? And we have to keep in mind that the possibility I'm going to give you is not a solid possibility. I mean, it's like we find ourselves in the middle of this skeptical swamp, skeptical quicksand. There's no firm ground beneath our feet. And there are certain procedures that allow us to move forward without establishing any firm ground. But at any moment, any step further we take, we have to remember that there is no firm ground beneath our feet. So the first step into the quicksand works like this. So what Derrida is saying, again, this stuff is the old as the universe. Buddha knew all this, okay? And Protagoras very famously says, man is the measure of all things that they are, and of things that are not, that they are not. This is, again, Derrida 2,000 years earlier, right? So, man is the measure of all things. There is no truth, there's only persuasion, there are only stories. And Protagoras himself is an interesting figure, but let's talk about one of his successors, a man called Thrasymachus, who has been immortalized by Plato in his famous Dialogue Republic. So what does Thrasymachus say? And so I'm drawing attention to this interesting exchange between Thrasymachus and Socrates. Basically, Thrasymachus, they discuss justice, truth, beauty, all that kind of stuff, justice most importantly. And, in the middle of the discussion, Thrasymachus barges in and says, Socrates, what the hell are you talking about? What's all this justice and truth? You're all children. You're all suckers. Because justice doesn't exist. Justice is a lie that the strong tell to the weak to keep them obedient. And likewise the truth and everything else. Again, this notion that there is no truth is just persuasion. And if you believe that something is true, you're a sucker. You have been fooled. You have been tricked by people. Or, as Derrida would say, maybe by anonymous systems. But anyway, but you have been tricked by somebody or something into accepting something on faith without actually adequate justification. This is the position of Thrasymachus. And Socrates gives many counter-arguments, and actually this counter-argument, I'm not sure if Socrates actually uses these words, but it's possible to read the passage in the following fashion. At least this is how Stephen Smith reads the passage, although we should go back and double-check the Republic, because I kind of feel that Socrates is saying different words. But again, in the interpretation of Stephen Smith, Socrates responds the following thing. He says, okay, fine, everything is persuasion, everything is lies, there's no truth, no justice. But how about your statements, Thrasymachus? When you say that nothing is true, is that itself true or not true? And it may seem like a cop out. It may seem like a stupid rhetorical move. But I think it should be taken very seriously. I mean, in some sense, is the relativist position itself relativistic? If I believe in absolute truth, does it mean that absolute truth exists for me? Okay, I don't think that so far this is a very robust answer. Let me rephrase it in a different fashion. Well, you see, again, you cannot really disprove this position. So it is impossible to produce a knockdown argument. I don't think that this is a knockdown argument. But there is, again, a strategy, and the strategy is this. Socrates makes Thrasymachus blush. He doesn't disprove him, he makes him blush. So the point is that it's not that Thrasymachus is saying something that is cognitively incoherent. There's a way, there's a negative way, and Sextus Empiricus is going to tell us about this. Sextus has an answer as to how to phrase this carefully without running into a logical contradiction. But the trouble is, if you consistently maintain that nothing is true and everything is power, you contradict not the rational part of your soul, but the desiring part of your soul. Specifically, what desire? Because isn't it like Thrasymachus says, look, Socrates and Cephalus and Polemarchus, Adimantus, Glaucon, you're all suckers. But when he says this, doesn't he claim to speak the truth? Isn't this isn't he trying to enlighten people? Isn't he making this important distinction? Okay, let me rephrase this in the most robust fashion, as far as I can. And the most robust fashion is this. Thrasymachus may be comfortable by saying that everybody else fools themselves. But does he want to fool himself? Does he care about the truth? So isn't this relativistic procedure, and in Derrida as well, isn't this relativistic procedure supposed to be critical in the search, or at least negatively, for grounds for truth? I mean, Derrida himself, and as well as Foucault, were social activists. They, fought for the rights of, minorities, prison population, Algerians in France. So they have this positive social program. How do they justify this positive social program? Okay, maybe this is not the best way to phrase it. Let me go back to Thrasymachus again. This notion that yes, maybe there is no truth, but don't you yourself need a distinction between truth and lies? Again, I think this is not a knockdown argument, but this is a robust position to some extent. Again, imagine a dictator, and this is a story that's often told about Hitler. For historical reasons, I think that we should be careful about these stories, because it's going to take too long. But I mean, of course, talking about the Nazis in our culture is a special kind of story. I mean, these are the only people, well, not the only, but one of the few groups of people whom it's all right to hate and dehumanize and blow their heads off with shotgun and laugh at them, right? So we should be careful. But there's a famous story told about Hitler, how especially, although I'm not sure if this story is true, but still, there's a story that especially towards the end of his of the Second World War, he increasingly would be intolerant of hearing opinions which did not coincide with his own. And this led to the problem of him losing touch with reality. So if everything is persuasion, if everything is just interplay of power, and especially if you are the dictator and you try to force your will on others, don't you yourself lose the touch with reality in an important sense? So again, what I'm trying to say is that, and this is exactly where Habermas is going to come in. In order to talk about truth, we need to have a free and equal discussion. Because, again, if I am Hitler and I want to hear the news from the front, I have to be sure on some level that people are going to tell me the truth and not to tell me the lies I want to hear because they're afraid to die. So basically, again, this is Habermas' strategy. Habermas in one sentence is that there are, against Weber, because remember, Weber talks about rationalization, how rationalization leads to this efficiency for efficiency's sake, leads to this emascination of all human values, dehumanization, iron cage of rationality. This is Max Weber. And also the Frankfurt School, this notion that reason leads us to some horrible dehumanized place. Habermas is saying no, reason has values built into it, built-in values. Now I think that, again, strictly speaking, although I have never seen Habermas talk about this, but actually Habermas also presupposes to make this work, he has to make an assumption. You have to assume that human beings have approximately the same nature. You have to make certain assumptions about human nature in order to make this work. So this isn't exactly deriving values from facts. This isn't exactly deriving an ought from an is, because I think some normative dimensions of human nature, the fact that we don't want to die, we want to be happy and healthy, these things are actually brought to the table. But still. Regardless, to the extent that we can share these assumptions about human nature, Habermas wants to say that there are certain values which are built into the structure of rationality itself. Okay, let me try to explain that. So, Habermas is an extremely fruitful philosopher. to some extent a Marxist. No, from this point on, I'm going to say, can you have market in communism? I'm going to say yes. At least according to one Marxist, Jürgen Habermas, you can have market in communism. So I am going to consider Habermas a Marxist, although that's a controversial claim. Oh, by the way, Habermas is still alive. Habermas is certainly the most important philosopher alive. I mean, I don't want to say that he's the most important philosopher of the 20th century, but of the ones alive, certainly most important. And this is a sign of me getting old and boring, that Habermas is slowly but steadily becoming my favorite philosopher. So again, let me start from afar. Again, I'm not sure if this is the best way to do this, but let's be careful and let me start from afar, just to make sure I don't get lost. So Habermas again has many influences on his thought. One of these influences is Anglo-American philosophy of language. There's this wonderful philosopher whose name is Peter Grice, I think. Doesn't matter. Grice. His name is Grice, and Grice talks about speech. And Grice says that successful speech, presupposes what Grice calls a cooperative principle. Cooperative principle. That speech presupposes cooperation. So, So is this collectivism? I don't know. In some sense, yes. Fuck your individual rights. Individual rights don't exist without community. Don't exist without community of people. Human beings are secondary towards their community. Say hi to Aristotle. Man is by nature a political animal. Without basic cooperation, without what Paul Gray calls everyday communism, you cannot have society. And you cannot even have functioning individuals. Something like that, whatever. So cooperative principles. And the cooperative principles, again, that this is a requirement of speech. For speech, in order to be possible, both parties, or if there are more, or at least all the parties to the conversation, need to have an intention to cooperate. They need to try to cooperate. And Grice actually fleshes this out. He talks about maximum of quantity, maximum of quality, and maximum of manner. So he will talk about quality, quantity, and manner. And so what are these? These are necessary conditions for speech to be successful. So maximum of quality is truth. You have to try to speak the truth at all times. Maximum of quantity is you have to try to be informative. If you want, you have to try to be clear, maybe. And there's also, maximum of relevance. CD. Relevance. You have to try to be relevant. This is self-explanatory. But also, maximum of manner. Avoid obscurity of expression. So try to be clear. So, I suppose in the past I did not talk about this, and maybe I shouldn't talk about this now. So let me bracket all this and maybe even cross this out. If you don't understand this, don't worry. But the most important one is this: maximum of quality, maximum of truth. That again, when you are speaking, it is. For speech, in order to be successful, people need to try to tell the truth. I mean, is this Kant's categorical imperative all over again? Well, yes and no. I mean, Habermas also talks about universalizability, although his universalizability is not Kantian because he presupposes certain things about human nature. Universalizability. But regardless of what we're talking about, again, there's this notion that, you see, if you say that there is no truth, there's only persuasion. If there is no truth, there's only lie. The word lying loses its meaning. In a quasi-Kantian fashion. Because if everybody lies all the time, if everybody lies all the time, we don't have communication, we have noise. And if you don't have communication, you have noise, it is impossible to lie. So lying presupposes this distinction between truth and lies. So again, is this a knockdown argument against Derrida? No, of course not. I mean, Hermeneutics of Suspicion still has to be taken seriously, but this is not a rational or logical argument against Derrida. This is an irrational, pathological argument against Derrida. We have certain desires that we want to satisfy in our life, and in order to satisfy these desires, and to some extent this goes back to sexist and this goes back to Hume, because we want to satisfy our desires. We need to presuppose certain things about communication. So maybe Gadamer is actually on the board for the right reasons. Because Habermas, in some sense, wants us to have faith, at least some faith, at least allow the possibility of truth. Because if we don't, then, basically, nothing makes any sense whatsoever. So even though you cannot prove that truth exists, you have to assume it, because otherwise nothing makes sense. But so again, I'm not sure if I should continue with this, but let me just give you one example. So this is from Grice and from Austin and from all the rest of them. This specific example is from John Searle. John Searle says that the sincerity condition in a sentence. So every sentence, every speech act has a sincerity condition. So when I say certain words, the implicit assumption in our shared practice of speaking is that I am being sincere. And Searle says it can be shown very clearly, because if I utter a sentence like, it's raining, but I don't believe that it is raining. So it's X, but I don't believe that it's X. Believe that it's X. This sounds weird and bizarre, and in fact, most of you will not even be able to understand what I'm writing on the board. Okay, my handwriting is illegible. You won't even be able to understand what I'm saying. Most people don't understand, because our shared practice is such that if you say, I'm looking outside the window, unfortunately this room has no windows, but whatever. I'm looking outside the window and I'm saying, it is raining, but I do not believe that it is raining. Your natural interpretation is that I'm not contradicting myself. Your natural interpretation is that I mean these in two different senses. For example, maybe I'm saying, it seems to me that it is raining, but I have a certain explanation for this optical illusion, and in fact it's not raining. Okay? In this case, the sentence is not self-contradictory. So, and this is our natural interpretation, because if I actually meant this in an Aristotelian sense, it is raining, but also in the same exact respect, I do not believe that this is raining. This sentence, although it's not a logical paradox, it's possible to say this sentence, it's not a mistake of logic and it's not a mistake of grammar. This sentence sounds weird because it breaks this maxim. This sentence becomes insincere. Like if I tell you, congratulations on winning the race, but I'm not one damn bit happy that you won the race. Again, it's a strange phrase. What do you mean, congratulations? You just told me that you're not happy. Isn't it a condition? Again, there's nothing in it logically contradictory in that sentence. But what is contradictory is, again, it goes against the cooperative principle. It goes against the shared practice of speaking. It goes against, Habermas would say, certain values which are embedded in our linguistic practice, or, as Habermas says, embedded in rationality. So when Habermas actually talks about practices embedded in rationality, I mean, we should make this concept richer. It's not just some kind of abstract rationality. It is human rationality as embedded in human communicative practices, which, among other things, take into account certain kind of human nature. So this is, again, it's a pedantic point, but Habermas is not Kant, although he takes certain things from Kant. So, or again, like if I in a normal conversation, I tell you, I promise, and in the same sentence I say, but I do not intend to keep my promise. This sounds like me screwing around. This sounds like me maybe making a stupid joke. Because under normal rules of conversation, if you promise, it means that you intend to keep the promise. And if, again, in the same sentence you say, I promise I will, post the sample exam tomorrow, but actually, honestly, I don't intend to do this one damn bit. You understand that there's something wrong with this. Okay, sorry, this takes too long. But this is what Habermas is trying. This is what Habermas is drawing at. Okay, so basically, again, Habermas, to summarize this, and also to make one step ahead and try to explain Habermas as a systematic thinker. This is Habermas's attempt to tell us that modernity is not a failed project. That modernity, the project of enlightenment, hasn't failed us. Modernity is an unfinished project. So people like the Frankfurt School or like Max Weber have lost their faith in the project of enlightenment, are saying that reason betrays itself, and basically we are moving, to a concentration camp or something, some kind of dehumanized future. We talked about this a little bit when we talked about Max Weber. This is a dehumanization, iron cage of rationality. Rationalization in Weber, alienation in Marx, and anomy in Durkheim. I hope that you those of you who read the Homicide, appreciate Habermas actually talks about all three, especially Weber's rationalization and Jürgen's enemy, as part of the same picture. And again, it used to be thought by people like Weber and the Frankfurt School, that this was an inevitable consequence of rationality. That basically rationality leads in this direction. And Habermas says no. So Habermas says no. He says no. Modernity is an unfinished project. This dehumanization is not the result of rationality. This dehumanization is the result of misunderstanding of rationality. Again, modernity is an unfinished project. And more specifically, well, again, let me say what I think is the most important thing in Habermas, because this way, if I run out of time unexpectedly, I at least have gotten the most important thing. What Habermas is saying is that basically, by the 21st century, and again, Habermas is still alive, says that human beings have come up with three robust ways of coordinating their behavior, in whichever order. The first one is coordination through bureaucratic power. So this is what Weber talks about again in the iron cage of bureaucracy. The second one is again the coercive laws of competition in the market. So let me write market competition. And if you remember, Weber thematized this. Weber said that this is what the growth of rationality leads to. This is what rationality leaves us with. And this is a dehumanized picture in which there are no humans. There's simply efficiency for efficiency's sake. There's efficiency for the sake of efficiency in the bureaucratic state apparatus and in the market sphere. Efficiency for the sake of efficiency, if you want. And Habermas comes in and says, but Weber, you forgot that there's a third type of coordinating human action. And this is what he calls communicative rationality. Communicative rationality. Communicative rationality. Basically, I mean, I don't know, somewhere, let me maybe write this here. Habermas is actually going to say that there are three types of rational action. There's instrumentally rational action, there's strategically rational action, and then there's the communicatively rational action. So instrumental, strategic, and communicative rationality. And he says the problem of Weber and the Frankfurt School is that they forgot about the third type, and they only thought about the first two. So again, instrumental rationality is exactly what Weber talks about. It's a Zweckrational, right? So this idea of abstract efficiency for efficiency's sake, instrumental rationality, like you give to your rational apparatus, to your computer, to your brain, you give a certain task, and the brain gives you the most efficient way of achieving that purpose. And your purpose may be insane. You know, it doesn't. I mean, I can tell you the most efficient way. I mean, I can calculate. Anybody can calculate. A computer can calculate the most efficient way to drive from home to work, or the most efficient way to skin your neighbor's pets alive. It doesn't matter. Instrumental rationality doesn't care about your aims. I mean, actually, I'm not sure if this is the way I usually talked about this, although isn't it the case that we are actually talking about a certain kind of aim for Weber. We're talking about aim of efficiency for the sake of efficiency. So it is a kind of instrumental aim that seems to subordinate all the other aims, something like that. I don't know. Strategically rational action is instrumental rationality in the domain of human affairs. So these two could go together. So an action can be at the same time, number one and number two. So strategically rational action, for example, if I want something and I achieve it, for example, by lying to you, or by convincing you to do something, by influencing you. And again, this strategic action for Habermas presupposes this manipulation. I treat you, when I act strategically, I treat you not as other human beings, but I treat you as objects. So I do certain things as if I am pushing a button on a robot. So I'm feeding you false information, or I'm trying to appeal to your emotions. So I'm not using you as a rational agent. I'm just trying to push your buttons to get you to do something which I want to do. And very often, this is what people do. And again, so this would be, strategic action would be precisely persuasion, would be precisely rhetoric. And then the question is, what is number three? And number three is kind of this, related to truth, or related to this Grice's cooperative principle. So this communicative rationality, or communicative action, presupposes what? What are we talking about? we are talking about something like a free and equal discussion. So communicative rationality, free and equal discussion, in pursuit of truth wherever it may lead. And more specifically, again, within the sphere, there are more careful formulations in the home assignment. I'm sort of summarizing loosely. If I had a quote on hand, I'd bet a quote from the home assignment, but whatever. This will do. So free and equal discussion, truth for the sake of truth. Again, so here, in sphere number 1, we do things because we're forced to, by the barrel of a gun. Coercion by legitimate violence, legitimized state violence. Number 2, here we do things, if you want, on the pain of hunger or because we want to turn a profit. But these two are coercive. This one, number 3, is supposed to be the sphere of autonomy, in the sense that in the sphere number 3, in the words of Rick Roderick, who was trying to explain Socrates. So, in the words of Rick Roderick rephrasing Socrates, this is where the only force that a free citizen recognizes is the peculiarly unforced force of the better argument. The peculiarly unforced force of the better argument. And this is, you see, again, this is the Jean-Jacques Rousseau's free obedience. You are free, and yet you freely obey. Why? Because you obey rationally. Peculiarly unforced force of the better argument. I don't want to write this on the board. Peculiarly unforced force of the better argument. Okay, something like this. And again, you see, immediately, I used to really hate Habermas. Why? Because when I was younger, I felt that the whole world was against me. And I completely did not feel, all of this looked like a sick joke. I mean, what? Peculiarly unforced force of the better argument. Habermas is going to talk about civil society, global governments, about our movement towards perpetual peace, United Nations. I mean, all of this sounded like a really, really malicious, sick, weird, sadistic joke. The world that we live in is so obviously unjust, unfair, and full of violence, coercion, misery, uncaused misery, that to talk about this sounds ridiculous. And so this was my position when I was young. And when I got older, I still think that this position, the position of my younger self, it still has relevance. I mean, I don't think I was entirely wrong when I thought about it this way. But what I have been able to do since then, I have really come to understand what Max Weber calls ideal types. That a model is useful even if it's not true. What Habermas is talking about when he's talking about communicative rationality is, I think, exactly the same thing that Hegel is doing when he's talking about the Rechtsstaat, or what Jean-Jacques Rousseau is doing when he's talking about the true social conduct, or what Karl Marx is doing when he talks about communism. We are not describing reality, but we are providing a normative model of reality. A normative model of reality. It doesn't need to be true. It doesn't need to be instantiated. Normative. In fact, it's not. It's not instantiated. But the trouble is, if you look outside the window and you say, "Oh, all of this is just fascism," or "All of this is just, I don't know, just power, persuasion, power, games of power," right? You lose important distinctions. So this gives you a certain standpoint from which you can assess and criticize practices. Again, immediately, people like Foucault and Derrida have their, radars flare up when people talk about this free and equal discussion, peculiarly unforced force of the better argument. Derrida immediately says, "Isn't this just another story?" And again, isn't this just some kind of another utopian story that is supposed to blind us to the truth of power? And Habermas, I think, at the end of the day, wants to say it could be, but it doesn't have to be, and you have to allow, at least impartially, you have to allow for this possibility. And again, not logically, but pathologically. I mean, what the hell am I doing in this class? Why am I here? Or I'm telling you about all these things. Is this an accurate description of Habermas? Or is this some kind of self-serving bias on my part? I mean, somebody like Derrida or Foucault, but especially Derrida, would alert my attention to the fact that maybe all of this is just power play. But, is it really, and what's in it for me? Why would I do that? Why would I try to fool you? Okay, this maybe, it's just asking this question, why would I want to fool you? This is not a good answer. So let me try to give a good answer. And the good answer, I think, is precisely what Socrates allegedly said to Thrasymachus. If I am trying to fool you, how do I know what the truth is? again, in some sense, you can and should see John Stuart Mill. John Stuart Mill in this picture. By the way, did I assign Mill? I should have assigned Mill. I certainly assigned bits from Mill last time. I don't know. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Or Karl Popper. This notion that if I myself, for my irrational reasons, because I have a certain kind of human nature, if I am interested in truth, I have to I have to create conditions for free and equal discussion. And in fact, I must want you to try to disprove me, because only then do I have any chance to reaching the truth. And Bourgeois has an article, I think it was assigned as a supplementary reading, where Bourgeois talks about how, if you close access to the university, or let's say only to the very rich, you what's the right phrase? Like, there's certain venues of criticism which you block. And it's important, again, in the marketplace of ideas, according to John Stuart Mill and Karl Popper, every idea has to have a right to be voiced. And if you introduce coercion into the system, you lose touch with reality. Again, in the same way that dictators allegedly lose touch with reality because they stop being able to trust their advisors because their advisors stop telling them what's true and tell them what they want to hear. So we had this discussion a while back in the course of political philosophy. Some people told me, well, Singapore is an example of a successful dictatorship. I mean, I'm not sure, I'm not an expert on this. I have no idea if this is true or not. And I asked them, but how do they know that they are successful or not successful? In order to say that you are a successful dictatorship, you need to at least be able to trust your statistics, the bureau of your statistics. And if you are really a successful dictatorship, how do you know that your statistics is actually valid, corresponds to reality, and not just forged by the Bureau of Statistics because a bunch of people just want to get ahead? Again, is this a knockdown argument against Derrida? No, but it's something to keep in mind. Okay, anyway, so let me continue. So, and what Habermas is saying is that this sphere of communicative rationality, I mean, it existed, and as an ideal type, it exists in human history, always, in some fashion. But Habermas, and your home assignment begins with this, says that historically speaking, in the 18th century, you had the emergence of a separate sphere, which he calls the public sphere. Public sphere. Well, actually, the bourgeois public sphere. The bourgeois public sphere. And this emerged when the bourgeoisie was trying to fight against the power of the nobility, and they had to mobilize the critical resources, critical in the sense of social criticism, right? So criticism of ideology, right? Critical resources of reason, because they wanted to fight against aristocratic ideology. And then Habermas tells us a story that, of course, while the bourgeoisie was fighting this struggle, they tried to mobilize it, but as soon as bourgeoisie won, and by the 19th century, all of this was destroyed, and you had what he calls a refeudalization of the public sphere. And basically no public sphere anymore. So again, it used to be a time, for a short period of time, there used to be a public space somewhere, in the street, in the coffee shops, in the press, in the newspapers, where this peculiarly unforced force of the better argument, to some extent, not completely, it's an ideal type, but to some extent was able to be expressed. But then what happened is that with the victory of the bourgeoisie, you have, let me just write one word, commercial media. You have the emergence of commercial media and basically ideology, commercial media, which is spreading some kind of noise which sells, but not really information, not really truth, but basically spreads ideology, not truth. But Habermas wants to say that to some extent, again, even though this sphere was diminished and is still diminished for Habermas to this day, this sphere does exist and it could be revitalized. And in fact, again, so what is the driving force behind this revolution towards communist utopia? So Marx thought it was the industrial proletariat, Young, Adorno, and Marcuse thought it would be the students, and Habermas thinks it's rationality itself is the driving force towards the better future. Now again, let me draw a schema and let me try to make this as concrete as possible. So Habermas is saying, again, we have 1, 2, 3. Let's correspond this to A, B, C. So you have the sphere of government apparatus, government power, government bureaucratic power. Let me write government bureaucracy. The second is again the market. And Habermas is a socialist. If you want, I don't know, Habermas to some extent is a Marxist. So yeah, you can have your market in communism, it's fine. It's just that your market has to be inscribed in the legal framework. So, what's the right phrase? Limited by the procedures of democracy. And this is our third sphere. And this is the public sphere. The sphere of civil society. This is what we're talking about. And in some sense, the goal of philosophy today, and why do we care about civil society? Why does reason care about civil society? Why does abstract reason and rationality care about civil society? Because civil society is the only space, is the only sphere in which this free and equal discussion can take place. So basically anybody, to the extent that they want to be rational, anybody to the extent that they want to answer any question whatsoever rationally, has to push towards this greater sphere of civil society. So again, I mean, take a very mundane example. I mean, my beloved cat had a stroke, and I was looking for the best solution, for the best medicine to administer to her. So I am downloading certain medical guidelines from the internet. I have this desire that there exists a public sphere of civil society which is dominated by free and equal discussion, such that I can download a credible medical manual which will honestly tell me what is the best veterinary practice, as opposed to, for example, some kind of ideological lie propagated by big pharma, not because this drug is actually good for my cat, but because they just want to sell more of it. I hope that this is clear. I know I'm speaking very fast, but I hope that this is. I hope that especially that this example is very clear. Again, any question that you have, like you want to treat some kind of medical problem that you have, or you want to find the best car, or find the best iPhone, or enroll into the best school, you have this desire to obtain information which is the product of free and equal discussion, and not just, let's say, has been paid by some marketing agency in order to spread lies, in order that, to get your money, something like that. So the task of philosophy for Habermas is to protect and enlarge the sphere of civil society against the encroachment of government bureaucratic rationality and this rationality of the market, profit for profit's sake, this coercive laws of competition and market logic. And Jürgen Habermas says this, and Michael Bourgeois says this, again, in his manifesto for public sociology. This is the purpose of public sociology, to protect the sphere of civil society from the encroachment of rationality of the market and the state. Okay, so let's continue with this discussion. So basically, and this is what I find most important in Habermas. So the Habermas's phrase for this is colonization of the life world. So the life world of civil society, Lebenswelt. So the life world of civil society gets colonized by forces of the government and the market. So colonization of the life world.
Do you mean the Lebenswelt?
Yeah, Lebenswelt. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Okay, so basically, what we are talking about for Habermas is, let me throw a bunch of concepts on the board, and then we'll see. Then I'll see if I'm able to explain the connection. So one concept is that autonomy is only possible as a combination of public and private autonomy. Public and private autonomy. I suppose what Habermas himself says, the words that he uses, is the liberty of the ancients and the liberty of the moderns. So this would be the liberty of the ancients, and this would be the liberty of the moderns. By the way, we should read this sometime. This is Benjamin Constant. I think the article by Benjamin Constant, who is a contemporary of Alexis de Tocqueville, I think Benjamin Constant's article is actually called Liberty of the Ancients. And Benjamin Constant says, well, it used to be in the past we had this liberty of the ancients, but now it's impossible for us, now we have to have the liberty of the moderns. And liberty of the ancients, some people associate with positive freedom, and liberty of the moderns with negative freedom, although I'm not sure, because I question this distinction, but whatever, I'll stick with it for the sake of the argument. And so basically, private autonomy, in some sense, is your ability to express your freedom in your own way. But public autonomy is communism, if you want, is us, or communism or communicative rationality. Communism or communicative rationality. I like this phrase a lot. Public autonomy is our ability to make decisions not being coerced by these instrumentally rational forces of bureaucratic or market power, but actually in the course of this free and equal discussion. This is public autonomy, public deliberation. Again, I need to talk about rights at some point. I need to talk about rights. I definitely need to talk about rights. And what is Habermas's criticism of right? I've erased Fukuyama from the board. Why do I want to talk about Fukuyama? Because you see, again, for somebody like Derrida, it's unclear if project of modernity is possible. For Fukuyama, it's already here. We already arrived. And Habermas, again, Habermas. So I think a very conspicuous thinker for our course, very productive thinker, because he shows, I think in the starkest contrast possible, that basically what the future holds for us is unclear. And we have two ways, socialism or barbarism. And I think the most, and the future is unclouded and uncertain. We do not know which one it's going to be yet, according to Habermas. And Fukuyama kind of already thinks that we've already arrived at the end of history, and basically one-liner criticism of Fukuyama by Habermas would be no, because what is happening right now is that forces of government, bureaucracy, and of course also competition in the market are colonizing the Lebenswelt, and all this wonderful stuff about the end of history is actually not working. Again, you remember Fukuyama says the end of history is free elections plus the market. And Habermas is trying to say, yeah, you can have free election and the market and have no freedom at all. You can go to this dehumanized society of rationalization and enemy. And in fact, the easy, again, this is such a cop-out. This is such a cop-out and a shortcut. But, Fermi paradox, it's easier than ever to imagine humanity destroying itself. I mean, so, especially since we talk about cosmology in this course, it's a question I keep asking myself. Is there any chance in Seven Hells, is there any chance at all that humanity will not destroy itself? And, it takes a lot of optimism, this ottimismo della volontà on my part, to actually believe that we actually have some chance of that. Going down this road and not down this road. So it's like a triple question marks, or quadruple question marks. Anyway, but let me go back here. So this is one issue I wanted to talk about, autonomy, public and private, and I need to talk about rights, how this specifically relates to the question of rights. And the second bunch of concepts I wanted to talk about is, what was it? I already forget. Wow, that's good. Oh yeah. So we're talking about weak and strong publics. We're talking about two-track model, weak and strong publics. Okay, so two-track model. So this is two-track model of communicative rationality. So in some sense, I'm writing this here. Actually, this is very opportune. This is good. This is exactly the way I should have written this. This, when we talk about public authority, this is what Habermas is talking about. This two-track model of he uses the words weak and strong public. Oh, I really don't like this. I think this is so misleading. So when we talk about weak publics, we are talking about loose, informal institutions of civil society. So let me write not weak, but informal institutions of civil society. And strong public, this would be the formal, or let's write official. Let's write formal institutions. Formal institutions of civil society. Institutions, right? So basically, the way that Habermas envisions this, and again, you gotta understand, modernity is an unfinished project in the sense that modernity has a chance, but this chance is not guaranteed by any measure. Again, Marx tells us in the second, third, and fourth volume of Das Kapital, how this is simply going to continue to increase, and we're going to end up in some kind of hive mind, and you can kiss your freedom and happiness goodbye. But there's a chance, and this is the chance. So there's nothing certain about this. And again, I want to look at this as Hegel's Rechtsstaat, or as Rousseau's True Social Contract, which is to say that this is highly unlikely and very difficult to achieve. But although I kind of feel that Habermas himself was much more optimistic about this, but it doesn't matter. He was optimistic, but this is not guaranteed either way. That you have, first of all, informal institutions of civil society. So discussion clubs, non-government organizations, YouTube channels, whatever, international media, newspapers that talk about problems well, this has some connection to Stephen Luke's Three Faces of Power, and especially Beckler and Barrett's. There's people that informal institutions of civil society need to be able to formulate the agenda. Formulate the agenda. But we are not talking about direct democracy. So it's not like the majority simply in a straightforward fashion votes for one proposal or another. The world is far too complicated for our problems to be solved by a simple majority vote. A simple majority vote will not work anymore. So what happens is you get this formal institutions of civil society that have to be responsive. It's very important. You need to have a democratic procedure which makes the formal institutions responsible to the informal institutions. So the informal need not have power, but they need to have influence on the formal institutions. And the formal institutions look at this agenda and find the best ways, technical ways, to implement this agenda. But it's also very important, Habermas wants to say that, this separation needs to be maintained. Yes, communicative rationality is the best, but it's not the only one. Let me just give one example. When a policeman is just chasing a robber across the street, he is not using communicative rationality. Like, you cannot fight crime with communicative rationality. A policeman needs to be able to use legal violence. So it is important to keep these areas separate. He wants to enlarge this sphere, and Habermas wants this sphere to be the basis, to be basic, to provide the framework. So number 3 needs to provide the framework within which number 1 and number 2 are allowed to operate in certain well-defined spheres. So a policeman can do certain things with his gun, but not other things with his gun. So this is control by institutions of democracy, if you want. But still, we are not talking about direct control. So basically, again, so this is every class in this course is a class about Marx for me. So this is one way to flesh out Marxist vision of communism. Because what this formal institutions of civil society do, by the way, so when I talk about formal institutions of civil society, I'm talking about the parliament, of course. So this is a talking shop. This is, if you want, YouTube. Oh, yeah, let me write this. Okay, this is YouTube. And this is the parliament. So these people just talk, but these people actually make the laws. But it's very important. The parliament does not control the economic and political sphere directly. They make laws that regulate political sphere. That's important. I mean, you want to have freedom in the market. That's going to work. I mean, it's probably, again, and even Marx talks about this labor vouchers, horrible discussion, horrible mess in Marx. Maybe some kind of an attempt to recreate market forces under communism, but let's forget about Marx, because with Habermas, you will have the market. It's just that market has to be controlled and limited by the overarching framework of civil society. Okay. So again, Habermas's own words are weak and strong public, but these words I find extremely misleading. So let me use informal instead. Now, there's also, so I should talk about rights. Let me mention at least one other thing, and techne and phronesis. Do you remember techne and phronesis from the home assignment? Say hi to Aristotle. I don't want to talk about this, but technically I have mentioned this in the lecture. Okay. So yeah, one other thing I need to mention before I go to rights is the idea that actually, if you look at this model, if you think about this carefully, you realize that the challenges that we face today as a society are global challenges, and they have global solutions. So for Habermas, all of this necessary, so the same way that any problem you face in life leads you to want, to desire the unrestricted operation of civil society, in the same fashion, this civil society can only truly operate as an international civil society. So we're talking about institutions of international civil society. International civil society. And so at the end of the day, when we talk about informal and formal institutions, we're talking about some kind of global government, yeah. So, and within which the sovereignty has to be possessed by the UN, and what the nation states possess is not sovereignty, but what was this phrase? Subsidiarity, I think. He doesn't say something. I think yes, subsidiarity. And there's a big unsolved problem for. Well, I don't want to say unsolved problem. There's a question to which the answer is not particularly clear. And this question is in Marx, and this question is in Habermas. How exactly you're supposed to make this? Because Habermas thinks that patriotism, civic patriotism, is important in this whole picture. But it's clear how you can make civic patriotism work locally, maybe within the nation state. But it's not exactly clear how you can make civic patriotism work globally. So it seems to me that what both Marx and Habermas envision is some kind of system where you have nation states at the bottom, and these nation states are patriotic among themselves. And then on a higher level, these nation states negotiate. So you have this, multi-layered system. And I don't want to waste time talking about this, but probably you're going to have several layers of formal institutions of civil society. So you have local parliaments and global parliaments, and then you also have layers of informal institutions of civil society, like local newspapers and global newspapers or something like that. And newspaper is a very strange word, but discussion clubs, something like this. Rights. Let me talk about rights. I think that the discourse of rights is cancer in the technical sense of the term. It's the thing that really, really infuriates me. I mean, pathological motivation. I should not let my emotions run loose in this class, but seriously. So I'm going to have to try to, control myself. But you see, again, so this needs context. You know game Deus Ex? Have you heard of this? Deus Ex, no? So, especially, I'm talking about the first one. This notion that you have an international terrorist organization that fights against major governments of the world to protect individual human rights. So an international terrorist organization which fights against major governments of the world to protect individual freedom and rights. Why the heck am I talking about this? Because the way this is phrased sounds so bizarre and so backwards to me. Why are we talking about rights? What are the rights? What rights should human beings have? Should I have the right to smoke tobacco, or to have as many children as I want? And I think the answer to this question, the answer that Habermas is going to give, is we don't know. We don't know. The rights can only be decided on the basis of this interplay between public and private deliberation. And again, you need both. You need both, and in an important respect, private autonomy is the basis for public autonomy, and public autonomy is the basis for private autonomy. So private citizens freely get together and make up the public, and then the public delegates certain rights to the private citizens. But the rights are secondary. The rights are not the rights, nonsense, imprescriptible, inalienable rights, rhetorical nonsense on stilts. So meaningless talk. So basically, what you have common interest, and this common interest defines our rights. And most importantly, what's the right phrase? The more salient, more important part of the common interest is the common disinterest, in the sense of common harm. So again, if this international terrorist organization from Deus Ex, number one, which came out in 2002 or something, whatever, if it tries to protect people's rights to smoke tobacco, that's a very stupid and misguided goal. So which rights are you supposed to have? Rights are supposed to be again tied to common interest. So what I'm trying to say is that this is going to be such a. Thankfully, I have absolutely no time, so I'll have to keep this rant as short as possible. Do you see? Recycling, pollution. Again, it's okay to be smart. I recently had a video about this recycling, as if recycling is a question of individual rights. Like, do I have the right to drink Coca-Cola from plastic bottles? Do I, as a producer, have the right to use plastic? That kind of thing. I mean, this sounds so backwards, and in some sense, it's interesting because I think that actually what is happening. So basically, what I'm trying to say is that the one issue that almost never gets discussed is government regulation. That pollution can only be solved realistically through government regulation. And isn't this colonization of life world? No, it's the other way around. We, the international informal institutions of civil society, we are prevented from talking about government regulation because this is actually a colonization by the market forces. The current government regulation is in the interest of the present market forces, but also, I suppose, in the interest of present administration. That's why they block any kind of discussion. of that kind. Of this is not very clear. I don't have a lot of time to explain this. But what I'm trying to say is that, like, we are talking about these global challenges, and they need to have global solutions. And so the international institutions, especially informal, but also the formal institutions of international society, international civil society, need to decide what needs to be done. And when it needs to be done, it has to be implemented, again, through law, not through direct control. We aren't talking about taking direct control of factories to reduce pollution. No, we're talking about law. For example, about internalization of externalities. I'm not sure if this example is clear or not. Probably not. But you know, I should have tried to mention this at least at some point. Okay. So this was not clear, but sometimes, you know, it's important for me to say something out loud to then think about how this can be explained in a better fashion. Okay, so we are very rapidly running out of time. And also, incidentally, this is the last class of the course. So shouldn't there be some kind of summing up? Shouldn't there be some kind of bombastic finish? Well, probably not, for a very simple reason, because this, for me, is a work in progress. And it's actually, like, in the past years, this course used to be just a horrible, random mess of topics, which I find mildly interesting. And this year, there's at least some semblance of structure. And to some extent, at least by the end of the year, I'm getting to a certain understanding of which topics should or maybe should not be included next year. So basically, by way of some kind of botched conclusion, because this is the last lecture, let me say the following thing. If you take a look at this picture, very carefully, so what we end up with is this. So on the one hand, this course, philosophy of the natural and the social sciences, what does it teach us? On the one hand, it teaches us that the question of truth is a very problematic question, and our access to truth is neither secure nor straightforward. And at the end of the day, in people like Derrida and a little bit like, and to some extent Michel Foucault, we are led to ask this question of whether truth in principle is possible at all. And in people like Jürgen and Habermas, we have a tentative answer, which is not a knockdown counter-argument, but a beginning of an answer, which goes something like this, that maybe truth is unattainable, but at least we have to try. At the very least, we have to try. Trying to attain the truth is a necessary, although maybe not a sufficient condition to achieving the truth. Maybe it is impossible. And given sort of looking at this issue from this standpoint, we arrive at the following conclusion: is that science understood in a Habermasian fashion, science as understood as, you know, this embodiment of communicative rationality. You know, this institutions of civil society, which can only ultimately function as international civil society. Science is the only way in which humanity can hope to achieve something like the truth. And this makes science, because again, this is a course in philosophy of the natural and the social sciences. So both the natural and the social sciences have this unique existential, but also political task in the modern world. So again, the success is not guaranteed. The success is not guaranteed, but you know, it's socialism or barbarism. The choice is clear. But even though the success is not guaranteed, this is the only thing that can give us a chance of success. And this would mean that science in general, and I suppose philosophy of science as the most important expression or self-expression, the self-consciousness of the scientific community, if you want, is the most important thing in the whole bloody universe, period. And this is my story, from protons to presidents, and from electrons to elections. And what better way to finish the whole course, I think, coming back to the very beginning. Okay, people. I hope this was fun. I hope this was interesting. I'm sure this was not particularly clear, but that's okay. It's a work in progress. It'll become clearer next year. If you have any questions, again, first and foremost, I hope that this was fun, but also maybe informative. If you have any questions, I would be more than happy to answer. Otherwise, thank you so very much. This would have been completely impossible without you, okay? It's a collaborative effort. I'll see you in the seminars, and good luck on the exams and all the rest of it. And I suppose, like early warning, Happy New Year. Thank you.